Live on News 24, you're watching Sharri.
Good evening. Well, the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism was a disgrace today. The Commission is meant to be examining the Opera House rally of October 9. And Jewish leader David Ossip was giving heartfelt evidence about the way that rally offended the community with its disgraceful chants of F the Jews, where's the Jews, and even we're going to kill them all. But then Palestinian groups were given the floor to harangue David Ossip about Palestinian casualty figures, Israel's military action in Gaza, even statements Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had made, and United Nations reports. I mean, David Ossip is an Australian. He's the president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. He represents Australian Jews. He has nothing to do with Israel's response, and he can't be accountable for casualty figures that may or may not be right or bias United Nations reports. Yet the Royal Commission allowed him to be interrogated by two lawyers acting for Palestinian groups. Now, firstly, just a reminder, here is what unfolded at the Opera House on October 9. This is the reason Ossip was there to give evidence.
Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews?
It's vile stuff. And the police just stood back. Their only arrest that night, a peaceful Jew. Now, Ossip started by giving evidence where he spoke about how police advised that it wasn't safe for Jews to be in the Sydney CBD that night. He said he was surprised and disappointed because the Premier had made the decision to light the Opera House in blue and white in solidarity with those killed in the Hamas attacks.
And we'd also seen quite an infamous gathering in Greenacre where one sheikh got up to celebrate the atrocities of October 7. And his infamous words of, it's a day of pride, it's a day of courage, I'm smiling, I'm elated, reflected a sympathy for the acts of violence. And to think that those individuals would be going down to the Opera House, where a gathering of the Jewish community would be taking place, obviously gave rise to concerns.
There was a vigil planned, but the Jews couldn't attend. And control of the streets, as Ossip said, was effectively handed over to the pro-Palestinian protesters.
I can't recall any group, particularly any religious or racial group, ever being provided advice that they should avoid their own city's CBD for their own safety and well-being. It was effectively the police saying, we can't keep your community safe. And as I've said in my statement, in my view, it was effectively the police transferring control of the CBD to the protesters.
Yeah, precisely. Now, the counsel assisting the Commission, Richard Lancaster, noted that police had disputed chants that some attendees heard of "Gas the Jews," and instead police claimed "Where's the Jews" was chanted. But then Lancaster made this point.
What exactly was intended by a chant of "Where's the Jews" is unclear, but the sentiment is unmistakably anti-Semitic. What other impression could a Jewish observer get from hearing a chant "Where's the Jews" or any abuse of Jews generally in a protest in the forecourt of the Opera House on the night on which the Opera House sails were illuminated in blue and white as an expression of sympathy to the nation of Israel for a murderous attack on its citizens 2 days earlier? The Commission has heard evidence that the conduct of the police on 9 October gave some members of the Jewish community the impression that the police were protecting anti-Semitic demonstrators.
Yep, he's quite right. But then the Royal Commission handed over the floor to lawyers representing major Palestinian groups. And these lawyers proceeded to interrogate David Ossip about alleged casualty figures in Gaza, about claims from the United Nations about Israel, about the context for the Hamas attacks. I mean, I actually couldn't believe what I was watching. Now, here's one lawyer Ragni Mathur, acting for the Australian Palestinian Advocacy Network. And APAN is run by Nasser Mashni, who has called Jews who support Israel filth.
And you appreciate and understand, don't you, Mr. Ossip, that Palestinians, both in the occupied territory and here in Australia, have also suffered deep psychological trauma?
This question during an anti-Semitism Royal Commission ordered after the terror attack at Bondi, but it got worse.
And the context in relation to the events of 7 October 2023 are firstly that in the period between 2008 and 2023, 7 October 2023, roughly 6,600 Palestinians had been killed by the Israeli security forces. That's the context, is it not?
I mean, that's your assertion. I wasn't prepared for this. There's no way I can actually comment on that.
Wow. David Ossip was being asked to account for the so-called context of October 7 and alleged casualty figures, which he couldn't possibly know if they were accurate or not. And again, this at a Royal Commission into the terror attack at Bondi. I mean, this conflating of the Middle East with Australian Jews is precisely what allegedly led to the attack itself. And yet the line of questioning was permitted by Commissioner Virginia Bell. And this vile interrogation continued.
It's your understanding, isn't it, however, that in the period of 2023, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs called 2023 the deadliest year for the West Bank Palestinians since it began recording casualties in 2005. In the first 9 months of the year of that year alone, before October 7, roughly 200 Palestinians had been killed, including roughly 40 children. That was information known to you, wasn't it, Mr. Ossip?
Again, I mean, that is your assertion. I haven't seen the document you're referring to. I'm not aware of the context. I'm not aware of who the author of the report was, what the background of that author was. I accept it's a very contested part of the world, that there are ongoing security challenges, but obviously you had a listed terrorist organisation, Hamas, which was running Gaza and terrorising not just Israeli civilians in the surrounds, but also terrorising the Palestinian civilian population of Gaza as well. It's very complex.
I can't believe David Ossip, who's a friend of Premier Chris Minns and who has done nothing but try to keep Australians safe over the past few years, I can't believe he had to sit there and answer questions about United Nations biased allegations against Israel. It's utterly disgraceful. And this line of questioning went on until the lawyer representing the Jewish groups, Zoe Hillman, objected. And only then did the Commissioner think perhaps this wasn't an appropriate line of questioning. But still, Ragni Mathur snuck in some more questions and David Ossip had no choice but to sit there and answer her hostile questions.
This witness is not the appropriate person to give an opinion as to what
Ms.
the
Hillman,
motivations.
the witness has given evidence of his impressions of the distress to the Jewish community. Ms. Mather it's open to her to seek to see if the witness will agree with the proposition that's being put. And I propose to allow it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Ossip, did you... I think the question... You'd completed your question, had you not?
Thank you,
Can you
Commissioner.
restate the question?
Oh, right, yes.
In the context of your earlier evidence that you found it insensitive that a protest should be called on the 7th, you understood, didn't you, and you appreciated that Palestinian Australians were likewise filled with deep fear with respect to what the future held for those in the occupied territory.
Look, I'm not the best place to opine on what Palestinian Australians were feeling. It's definitely possible and probably likely that there was concern after you had the government of Gaza commencing a war in such a vicious and brutal way as it did. Notwithstanding all of that, I think it's important for all of us as citizens of Australia to show kindness and respect and understanding and sensitivity to others. And notwithstanding any trauma that those Palestinians, Australians were feeling, I feel like if they were involved in organising this rally at a time when such grievous acts of violence were being committed against Israeli civilians, I think that showed a lack of sensitivity.
He was forced to answer the question and he handled it superbly. Now, there was another lawyer who wasn't much better. This is Dominic Toomey, acting for the Palestine Action Group, which organises many of these troublesome protests. And here's one interaction. And again, Ossip responded very well.
You are aware, aren't you, that Israel Defence Force fighter jets began conducting airstrikes in the Gaza Strip at around 5:30 p.m. Sydney time on the 7th of October?
I just have to make the point, this is a Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism. We're dealing with the protest where protesters shouted out, F the Jews and we're the Jews and I'm going to kill them all. And I'm a bit confused as to why we're getting caught up in the minutiae of the timeline of a foreign military operation, even though I do reject the premise of your question.
Exactly. And that lawyer, Dominic Toomey, is the president of the New South Wales Bar Association, by the way, which I find worrying. Now, as you heard there, Ossip tried to stop the questions going ahead. He said it again. He said he thinks it falls outside of matters that are before the Commission, but Virginia Bell ruled that this was all in order. Have a look.
Mr. Ossip, if the line of questioning falls outside matters that are properly before me, I will rule the question inadmissible. I have not made that ruling.
And that was how this objectionable, offensive line of questioning began. And Toomey continued to ask Ossip about what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had said in the aftermath of the Hamas attacks, where his civilians were raped, slaughtered and kidnapped.
Are you aware that Prime Minister Netanyahu at 6 p.m. Sydney time on the 7th of October declared that Israel was at war with Hamas, not an operation, not a round, at war, and that Israeli Defence Forces had launched airstrikes into Gaza, vowing to inflict an unprecedented price?
And Ossip was even grilled about his personal conversations with New South Wales Police, which he shouldn't have had to answer.
So you have never discussed with police their investigations into what happened on the 9th of October?
There have been discussions with police about the events of the 9th of October, concerns about some of the behaviour we saw that evening, and repeatedly I've asked police to ensure that any unlawful conduct is addressed through investigation and, if necessary, prosecution.
And have they been discussions between you and police officers or others and police officers?
And it went on, and that was highly inappropriate. And Toomey was trying to present his clients as completely innocent. But have a look at what the Palestine Action Group actually said on the night of the October 9 protests. And I first reported this exclusively last October. I've also obtained footage of the speech made by Asala Sahara, who was with the Palestine Action Group at the time, and she helped organise that Opera House rally. She said in her speech that Hamas has the right to resist. These comments just 2 days after 1,200 innocent babies, children, parents and the elderly were gunned down in cold blood.
So to anyone who comes out with an argument that says Hamas is a terrorist organisation, let me tell you that where it is internationally recognised that we Palestinians, as Hamas, have a right to resist.
She also defended Hamas as fighting against colonialists.
I will say it loud as I can. Hamas practices anti-colonialism.
And she urged the crowd to use the word Sahayani, meaning Zionist, and not the word Yahud, which means Jew.
Please use the word Sahayana, not the word Yahud.
The current Palestine Action Group organiser, Josh Lees, also said he supports Palestinians when they fight back. Now, again, these comments were just 48 hours after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
And we're on the side of the Palestinians, not just when they're the victims and being massacred. We're also on the side of the Palestinians when they fight back.
So that's the Palestine Action Group, again, whose lawyer today said they had condemned the anti-Semitism of the Opera House protests. What a joke. Perhaps he should look at these comments before making those claims. Now, ultimately, eventually, Commissioner Virginia Bell did shut all of this nonsense down.
We have now received some material concerning the steps taken in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas incursion into the territory of Israel. We are not going to explore that the hostilities in greater detail in this commission.
But that took far too long. Now, David Ossip did extremely well. As you saw, he was calm, polite, respectful, sensitive and empathetic to Palestinian suffering. And he should be applauded for the extraordinary way he handled that. But the bottom line is deeply troubling. Commissioner Virginia Bell allowed the lawyers representing the Palestinian advocacy groups to cross-examine Ossip about the actions of the Israeli government while he was giving evidence about the fear, the trauma and the anti-Semitism experienced by Australian Jews. This was a profound perversion where a witness appearing before the Royal Commission was placed in the position of answering for the conduct of a foreign government. This is victim blaming, and the Royal Commission outrageously allowed it to unfold. Worse still, allowing this line of questioning plays into the dangerous narrative that Australian Jews are legitimate proxies for Israel and may be blamed, challenged, or held collectively accountable for events in the Middle East. This conflation is at the heart of the anti-Semitism crisis that has swept Australia since October 7. And today, it happened on the Royal Commission's watch. And I'll come back to that later in the show with Simone Abel from the Executive Council of Australian Jury. But now it was day 2 of the explosive Alan Jones trial, and the young athlete, known only as Jay, returned to the stand to give evidence. The alleged victim was emotional as he recounted a weekend away at Jones's Southern Highlands home. And here's the latest from Channel 7's Chris Reason.
Sitting unresponsive to lurid details from alleged victim, then teen athlete, complainant Jay, recounting a trip to Jones's sprawling $17 million farm at Fitzroy Falls in 2004, alleging that in the car on the way, Jones took hold of my leg and part of my penis and said, "Oh, what's that?" When they arrived, he says, he was told to shower and change into a bathrobe, nothing else. "I almost knew what was going to happen," he said. "He wants me to come out in the nude, easy access. He's going to touch me." Jones, then in his 60s, allegedly grabbed the teen's penis and kissed him. Very sloppy. Saliva was everywhere, up on my nose and down on my chin. He says he asked him to stop, went to his bedroom. Jones allegedly followed, lay beside him. "Probably as scared and nervous as I was in a long time, like my heart was going to come out of my chest."
And Alan Jones denies the allegations. OK, let's turn to some other headlines now. And questions around Pauline Hanson's security have again been raised after protests erupted outside a One Nation event at a Hawthorn pub last night. And joining me to discuss, News24 host Steve Price and former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger. Terrific to see you both. Michael,
Sorry.
Look, police shielded Hanson from around 100 protesters, but as we saw, one group did manage to break through to chant disgusting messages. This is a security issue.
Look, it certainly is, but this is only helping Pauline Hanson. It keeps her in the news. And, Sharri, it might come as a big surprise to people watching tonight, but Melburnians are sick of these demonstrations by the fascist left. We've put up with them for 2 years in these Palestinian demonstrations in the CBD, and we've got the socialist left. This is the hard, extreme fascist left now trying to take on Pauline Hanson. If they keep doing this, her vote is going to increase because people here are sick of these extremists. This is one of the things that's tainted Melbourne and Victoria for the last couple of years. And the more they do this, the better it is for her. So please, if you've got any understanding of how politics works, my friends in the mad socialist left, please stop this because you're only helping the woman you're trying to harm.
I mean, I agree with you, Michael. I think that's true. People are totally sick of it. They hate it. It only encourages support for One Nation. But, Steve, I also do think this is a serious concern and it's a safety issue for Pauline Hanson. And, look, you've got to say, I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure Michael has too many friends in the hard socialist left, but we'll park that notion to one side. The Public Response Unit was called out last night. Now, that's an organisation that is hired and trained to handle violent protests. And so they're getting, obviously, intelligence within the Victoria Police Force that there is a serious threat to Pauline Hanson. Now, we've seen all this before. I mean, Michael and I are old enough to remember, back in the mid-1990s, Pauline Hanson coming to Melbourne, and there were violent protests, much bigger than that one last night, surrounding her and trying to silence her. She's already said today on radio that she intends to spend quite a lot of time in Victoria in the lead up to the November election. She's going to make at least 3 or 4 visits to regional Victoria. Can you imagine the police resources that are going to be required to make sure that she's kept safe wherever she is? But it is really, as Michael said, it's not doing her vote any harm at all. And interestingly, at that meeting last night, there were 150 One Nation supporters in attendance, somewhere between 150 and someone else said 300. I'm not sure the exact figure. And they paid $120 a head. I don't think the existing major parties, either Labor or the Liberals or the Nationals, would get 150 people on a cold Melbourne night in the middle of winter to pay $120 to go and listen to their leader.
Well, she's certainly a draw card, that's for sure. And wherever she goes, she's just mobbed on the streets. It's kind of quite extraordinary, really. Let's turn to the latest Redbridge poll on the Victorian state election. Both of you are in Victoria, of course. The Coalition is leading on 30, Jess Wilson soaring ahead there, followed by Labor on 23 and One Nation on 22%. Freshwater Strategy has a similar story in their polls. So, Michael, Jess Wilson does seem to be doing well. Do you think, I mean, still a couple of months away, 4 months away, but do you think she's on track to be Premier?
I think she is. You'd prefer to be in her position than Ben Carroll's position because you add the Liberal One Nation vote together, they're closing on 50 and a bit more. 52, and the left vote, which is Labor, Greens and the Cannabis Party, are sort of, a bit sub-40. So it depends how many seats we win. We need to win 16 seats without losing any to get to 45 out of 88 to get a majority in our own right. Is it likely that One Nation will win a few? If you're on 22% primary across the state, you're probably on 35, maybe 40 in some country seats and lower in the city. So One Nation may win a few. So, the objective is to win government. Obviously, Jess Wilson, her team will have to negotiate with One Nation afterwards if we don't get to 45 seats. But I think there's a unity of purpose between the Liberal Party, One Nation, the Liberal Democrats and other centre-right parties to defeat this toxic government which have basically destroyed Victoria. And I think Carroll's going to lose, as they should. He's been there for the entire journey of the Andrews-Allen government to sort of say, oh, I'm a new face. No, Ben, you've been there forever, mate. You're part of the problem. You're not the solution.
No, exactly. But, I mean, Steve, you've always been a bit pessimistic or worried that Victorians will vote Labor in again. How are you feeling about it now?
Well, changing to Carroll helps the Labor Party, obviously. I mean, he's had a little dead cat bounce in the polls. They're up a couple of points, so that's going in the right direction. There's going to be a damning report come out tomorrow around Daniel Andrews and his dealings with the Fireys union down here. That apparently is going to be explosive. That won't help Ben Carroll. Victoria is not Queensland and Victoria is not regional New South Wales. One Nation would always find Victoria the hardest state to get some traction in. But when you look at yesterday, Pauline announced 7 upper house members. They're obviously targeting the upper house, hoping that they can get enough in there to hold the balance of power. I agree with Michael that Jess Wilson's on track to win, but the Labor machine is very clever, very determined, and they're not frightened to pull dirty tricks. So this is going to be a fascinating 4 months. It'll be closer than everyone thinks. You can't predict it this far out, I don't think.
And meanwhile, Liberals are just getting inundated with questions, both federally and in Victoria, about whether they would do a deal or an alliance with One Nation if it came down to it. I mean, Andrew Hastie was the latest here. He was this morning on News24.
I mean, Peter, I've always enjoyed preference flows from One Nation in previous elections. That's not changed. The question is, do I want to go into a formal partnership with them? And the answer to that is no. I believe in the Liberal Party and I want to win government and have a Liberal government.
That was with Pete Stefanovic. But Michael, I mean, they're each trying to. Every Liberal you hear is trying to wiggle an answer out on the spot on live television. I mean, they need to work out whether they actually are going to do an alliance, whether they will do preference deals, and work out how to answer questions from journalists about this.
No, I think to be fair, the position's clear, and it's this.
Yeah,
One,
you tell us.
Will Angus Taylor or Jess Wilson form a government with One Nation as part of the government and have ministries? The answer is no. Nor have One Nation asked for that, by the way, or privately or publicly. Has there been any indication they want to join a government? I don't think they want to. So are we intending to go into government with One Nation? The answer is no. Are we intending to, if we don't have a majority in our own right, talk to the anti-Labor parties, including One Nation, Liberal Democrats, Independents, whoever else, Teals, about confidence and supply to ensure that we have the confidence of the House in case we have a minority? Yes, we will be doing that. And thirdly, will we be swapping preferences with One Nation? Well, the Greens will be going last, Labor will be going second last, and One Nation will be going ahead of those two. It's inconceivable that the Liberal Party, after the shocking mess that Labor have left in Victoria, or the economic disaster coming federally, that we would give Albo any preferences, or the anti-Semitic Greens. So there's your answer. No to being part of government, yes to confidence and supply, and yes to preferencing One Nation ahead of Labor and the Greens. And that's the answer, Sharri.
Well, you give a far more clear answer than most politicians. But Steve, the issue is that if the Liberals or if the coalition falls well short of governing in its own right, then it might have to have conversations about ministries or governing in an alliance.
Look, I'm great friends with Michael, but he displays the sort of arrogance that's got the Liberal Party in trouble. I mean, Angus Taylor won't even have a meeting with Pauline Hanson. She hasn't seen him since he took over as the leader. So the Liberals have got to wake up to themselves. I mean, they're not. I mean, the polls say that the public of Australia are sick and tired of arrogant Liberals and lying Labor Party people. And so that's why they're going to Pauline Hanson, Michael. I mean, you can't just sit there and say, oh, we won't form government with them. Well, you might have to, mate. I mean, we want to get rid of Labor in Victoria. We don't care who you do a deal with. Let's just get rid of Labor. And if it means you have to form a coalition with the One Nation, do it.
Michael, got to give you a response to that.
Well, we'll be forming a coalition with the National Party. There's never been a request by One Nation for to be part of the government. No, Steve, seriously, mate, historically our relationship has only ever been with the National Party. One Nation haven't asked for portfolios.
Look where that got
and
you.
those discussions...
Look where that's got you.
Well, hang on. Those discussions will only ever take place after election, but I can't see the
Can't you
Liberal
remember
Party
the last federal election, Michael?
Well, that wasn't a One Nation election. That was about a free money election where Labor bought the election with billions and billions of dollars of free money. That's why they won the election. It wasn't really about One Nation. These things are yet to be determined, but they'll be determined after the election, Steve.
All right, Michael
Not
Kroger.
a question of arrogance, my friend.
No, and I certainly wouldn't agree with the characterisation of you as arrogant, Michael Kroger, just getting that in there. All right, Michael, Steve Price, good to see you both. And still to come, major concerns about business and the economy, plus some breaking news about Labor's tax changes. Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson will join me after the break. Well, in breaking news, the Albanese government has backflipped on its plan to scrap negative gearing for widows. The Australian's reporting that Labor has caved into demands to preserve grandfathering of negative gearing on residential homes in case of death or divorce, unwinding its widows tax and exempting testamentary discretionary trusts from the new minimum capital gains tax rate. And Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson joins me now, live from Maroochydore, Queensland. Tim, great to see you. Thanks for your time. Well, let's start with this breaking news.
Thank you for having me, Sharri.
Are you satisfied with these changes as they're being reported by the Oz?
Well, of course we're not satisfied because the government has introduced a series of taxes Australians didn't vote for. They're paring it back after laying a series of financial landmines across the country. As people are slowly discovering them, they're financially maiming households, families, and of course widows. The government is now trying to defuse the landmines they've laid across the economy. But it's not enough. They haven't found them all, and they're certainly not prepared to defuse all of them. Australians deserve to go to an election, vote for a government, and then for that government to honour its commitments, not to wake up one day when the Prime Minister has, after 50 times promising to the Australian community, change his mind and then turn around and break his word.
So even with these changes, you would still unwind the tax reform if you got into government?
Well, we shouldn't use the word tax reform. It's a tax grab, and it's just a budget that's focused on how it increases the revenue of the government. So we've said consistently we will repeal the measures in the budget that increase capital gains tax because it's hitting startups and small businesses and those who are backing themselves to get ahead. We'll change the rules back on negative gearing and, of course, on trust, because what the government is doing is not just, tightening an economic noose around the small business of the country. They're undermining the very basis in which small businesses are the foundation of the Australian economy.
Look, we're hearing a lot about first home buyers. Figures show that about 34,000 first home buyers are at risk of a $2.2 billion wipeout with property prices dropping. This is mainly the first home buyers who entered the market with the 5% loan scheme. So, I mean, Tim, what do you think the government should do now to address this situation where you've got thousands, tens of thousands of first home buyers who could be at a major financial loss?
Well, it's difficult to know what the government should do. It's a problem that they have created for themselves. They actively stoked young Australians to take out more debt perhaps than they could afford, or certainly that they'd saved for themselves. Now they're finding themselves in negative equity and essentially hostage to their properties. And of course, it's not just them. There's been about $230 billion that's been wiped off the value of homes across the country. And that means that there'll be plenty of Australians out there who will be living in negative equity where they owe more than their house is worth, and they're now living to service a bank rather than themselves and to advance their own wealth and opportunity. The government has to go back in time, effectively, and undo the damage they've done. Instead, Australians are just left with the wreckage.
I mean, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, over the past couple of days has been celebrating news about the economy. He says more businesses were created in July and that headline inflation is coming down. What's your response to this?
Well, I don't want to, I want to be very careful about what I say, but I would say that he probably needs a breathalyser, frankly. The idea that you'll be high-fiving yourself after seeing a huge number of small businesses being opened because people are trying to restructure their finances and declaring this is some new era of growth is, frankly, just delusional, and a lot of people have called that out. Yes, there was a spike, but it was a spike because people are restructuring their finances. At every point, this government has overseen record small business confidence collapsing, record consumer confidence collapsing, and this government simply does not understand the impact its budget has had on the Australian economy.
That was a joke, right? When you said he must need a breathalyser. You're not making actual accusations against the Treasurer. I'm just checking.
Well, all I'm saying is that somebody who makes such ridiculous claims needs to really get a sanity check. And this is the problem. The Treasurer and the Prime Minister think that they can spin and lie to the Australian community and get away with it. We need to call out their BS. We need people to understand, and the Australian people to understand, that they are being lied to by this government. And even worse than that, they lie so easily. As we've seen in the case of Victoria, we had a government that consistently lied to the public, who saw government as simply a pathway to take from taxpayers to feed themselves and their mates. We're now the most corrupt government in nearly Australia, you have to argue Australia's history, in Victoria. And Anthony Albanese has taken that model and exported it to Canberra.
Just a quick couple of questions, just really quickly before we go. You know, there's a lot of discussion about how the Liberal Party should handle One Nation. You're one of the only politicians who managed to win a seat back from the Teals. Do you think there does need to be a preference deal, at the very least, done with Pauline Hanson?
We always look at preferences on a case-by-case basis. Pauline Hanson has previously got Fraser Anning elected to the Senate. You know, I'm not a big fan of preferencing people like Fraser Anning who then go on and consort with very undesirable sections of the community. We should look at this in a measured way at the time, factoring in all the information. We know that the Greens, put up anti-Semitic candidates. We certainly want to put them last.
Sure. Just very quickly, Tim, just your reaction to my editorial where I spoke about Jewish leader David Ossip facing a grilling from lawyers acting for Palestinian advocacy groups today at the Royal Commission in what I saw as a case of victim blaming.
Well, this is what we should be very concerned about. The point of the Royal Commission is to get evidence and truth on the record about the scale of the anti-Semitic attacks that have occurred across the country. The Prime Minister and the government has tolerated an escalation of anti-Semitism where we basically have the biggest outbreak of racism in Australia's history. And we should be supporting the Jewish community to tell their truth and to make sure that they are able to stand up and speak out because it's important for the record.
Yeah. All right. Tim Wilson, thank you very much. And still to come, Simone Abel from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry will talk about that very issue. Plus, Albanese's tax changes have sent property prices into freefall. And the experts who will join me next predict that the worst is yet to come. That's after this quick break. Thanks for tuning in. Well, the total value of the national property market has reportedly dropped from $12.7 trillion to $12.5 trillion in just 4 months. And joining me to discuss is auctioneer Tom Panos and SQM Research Managing Director Louis Christopher. Thank you both for your time. So, Tom, I mean, that's $230 billion wiped from the national property market in just 4 months. It's massive.
It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And to be honest with you, there's no signs that it's about to change anytime soon. So that number in a month or 2 months might even be bigger. So, Sharri, like as I said to you off air, no one is happy. And to me, one of the biggest unintended consequences that we're going to face soon is I think there's going to be a big fight between the state government and the federal government. 25% of revenue for the states or New South Wales comes from stamp duty, and that's come to a bit of a halt at the moment. So it's not good at all.
I mean, Louis, we're hearing a lot of people say this is the worst they've ever seen, or at least in recent times. How bad is this?
Yeah, it's been the worst we've seen in some time. Briefly, on the outbreak of COVID, we had a little bit of a panic in the market. That quickly settled down once the government brought in stimulus into the economy. Before that, we go back to about 2017, where there was a reasonably sized downturn where housing prices fell by about 8 to 9%. And then before that, we need to go back to about 2011. This has a feeling of being something bigger than the 2017 downturn, that's for sure. We're now recording listings at near record highs or at record highs for some cities now. And we've been recording this data since the 2010s. Asking prices are falling fairly quickly now. So vendors are trying to adjust. We've got Sydney down by 6% from its peak in terms of asking prices. Yet we're still seeing real lows in auction clearance rates. So despite vendors reducing their asking price, many of them are still not meeting the market. And that is because buyers are continuing to retreat.
And you're seeing that firsthand, Tom?
Well, I mean, Sharri, to give you an idea, on Saturdays I run an auction company, and not only are we having properties not selling, we're having people not register. So what they're basically saying is, we know that property prices have dropped, we know that there's bargains out there, but we actually don't have no confidence to bid now, because we're concerned if we do and buy a bargain, it's going to be even cheaper next month. That's the concern at the moment. And negative equity is an issue. There's a group of people that have been seduced to buying early with a small deposit. Now, some of these people, they're the most vulnerable cohort.
First home buyers.
The first home buyers. So, Sharri, if they bought a property for $1 million and it drops 10% and they borrowed 95%, they've borrowed $950 plus their solicitor's fees, plus all those other costs involved with buying. We're talking about young couples losing $100,000 as they start off their life.
It'd be incredibly stressful. I mean, Louis, you're saying 6% on average, but then, of course, in some suburbs, the fall is much greater than that.
Yeah, that's right. Indeed, I was doing a conference with Tom earlier today, and we covered Sydney's eastern suburbs. We think asking prices for houses, well, it's registering a 15% fall there on houses. Then on the Gold Coast, we're recording about a 13% decline in units on the Gold Coast and about an 8% decline for houses. So it's varied, but the downturn is overall uniform. It's occurring everywhere now except for perhaps Darwin, but even the Darwin market has slowed down. So this has gone beyond what was initially a Sydney and Melbourne issue before the property taxation changes to a nationwide issue.
I mean, Tom, you know, the property tax changes are obviously the instigator for this crash, if you like. But I mean, it is the broader downturn. People don't feel well off. The interest rates, the petrol prices, the inflation.
Yeah, so, Sharri, firstly, when you're telling someone, like in the eastern suburbs, as Louis has just mentioned, hey, you are $500,000 or $1 million poorer, automatically, psychologically, that person goes into defence. That family actually does not want to invest. Then you turn around and you've got cost of living, pressures, fuel. We know that the fuel excise comes to an end or has just come to an end on the weekend. All these things there. And in addition to that, we've got interest rates, which, thank God, there appears to be no increase next week. But we're not out of the woods because we're still way over that inflation number.
The 2 to 3%.
2 to 3%. And Sharri, if anyone looks deep into what causes inflation, they'll turn around and say, hey, a big part of that is the government itself with the way that they're actually going to spend. So there's no sign of all that we're going to get any rate cuts anytime soon. So at this stage, we got challenges, we got headwinds at the moment, and there's nothing to appear that it's going to change. The only thing I will say is, as long as unemployment doesn't grow, people might not be forced to sell, and if they can hang on to their property prices might not go down to that real bottom level because they can hang on to it until the market picks up. We don't know when that will happen, of course.
No, it'll be looks like it'll be a really lacklustre spring market, which is, when most people look at putting their property on the market. Louis, I don't know if you can make this prediction. You're obviously looking at the data, looking at the research, whereas Tom's seeing it all firsthand every weekend. But, I mean, do you think we are going to get to that sort of crisis recession level? I mean, where is this going?
Yeah, look, I'm not in the camp that thinks this is going to turn into a housing crash. I think we're missing one key ingredient for a crash to occur, and that is an oversupply of new real estate. Rental vacancy rates are still hovering around 1.2, 1.3%. When you look at the crashes which have occurred globally in Japan, in Ireland, in the US, having an oversupply of new real estate was a key ingredient combined with a slowdown in population growth. Now, we're not having either of those two. So I'm still in the camp at this stage that, look, yeah, this downturn is going to be, it's going to hurt, but I don't think we're looking at anything like, say, a 30% decline or anything like that. But it will be a painful adjustment. That is what is occurring in the market. And Tom refers to essentially the wealth effect upon the economy.
Yeah.
And most economists are aware of that housing is a big wealth impact upon the greater economy.
All right, Louis, Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Sharri.
your insights.
Thank you.
All right, and still to come, the Jewish leader gives her reaction after that disgrace today. Stay tuned. Well, lawyers for Palestinian groups today claimed that the Opera House rally wasn't convened to celebrate the Hamas attacks. But have a look at this Facebook post that the Palestine Action Group put up just before 11 o'clock at night on October 7, the same day as the Hamas attacks. And it says that Israel has declared war on Palestine for the humiliation it suffered today when Palestinians tore down apartheid walls at a Gaza border and began to enter 48 land that is rightfully theirs. And joining me now is Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Head of Legal, Simone Abel. Welcome. Well, how would you interpret that post?
I think there's really only one way to interpret it. I think the fact that they use the word humiliation or humiliate, it's like they're rejoicing in what happened on October 7th. There's an element of glee, and that was something that was observed as well at the time on October 7th, was just the sheer glee of the terrorists who attacked civilians in Israel.
Today at the Royal Commission, we saw David Ossip, outgoing president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, interrogated by lawyers for different Palestinian groups. Do you think this was appropriate, that he was asked to account for Israel's, supposed actions in Gaza?
I think the fact that you have one of the leaders of the New South Wales Jewish community having to answer those kinds of questions when clearly what we were there to discuss was domestic anti-Semitism and the impact on the Australian Jewish community is just unacceptable. And I think, we all feel quite affronted by that. And it felt as though there was an element of gaslighting as well about the movement and what its real intentions are.
Do you think it was this dangerous conflation of, Australian Jews and a foreign war?
I think that's been one of the issues all along, is that we are scapegoated by this movement, irrespective of where we stand on the political spectrum or what we believe in. It's not relevant. At the end of the day, we're all Australians. We live here. We have the right to, gather in the CBD and to do all sorts of things that we haven't been able to do, unfortunately.
One of the lawyers representing the Jewish group, Zoe Hillman, tried to object, but the Commissioner, Virginia Bell, overruled her and allowed the questions to go ahead.
I think, I'm not going to question what the Commissioner has done. I have to hope, and we have to hope, that there's so much evidence before the Commission now about the protest movement and also about the correlation between anti-Semitic incidents and the protests. And I can tell you, in my role at ECAJ, I've seen spikes in anti-Semitic incidents around the significant protests that have taken place in Australia. So for me, it's not at all ambiguous that there is a link between violence and these hateful words that are taking place.
Because one of the questions the Commissioner put to David Ossip today was, was it the timing of the protest when the Jews were grieving? Is that why, it was so hard to handle the Opera House rally? And so I just felt like, there's not a full understanding yet of the fact that it's, the terror flags that are flown, the chants, that are so distressing at any point, not just after October 7?
I think for anyone, Jewish or non-Jewish, hearing chants of death to any other person in our democracy is just really horrific and an affront to all the values that we stand for. And I don't think, you know, this is not about... it's not about what's happening overseas. At the end of the day, as I said, we as a community have a right to gather peacefully, just as any other community. And I think that that particular rally had a really chilling effect. And we've spoken as well last time, Sharri, about the impact and the 2-year anniversary and the plan to hold the rally then. And it was prohibited for a good reason.
I mean, it's still galling to think that really there weren't any, that we know of, criminal charges relating to that Opera House rally.
I think looking back on the footage, it astounds me, honestly, because there was so much that has been documented that is wholly unlawful, just to my eyes, and unacceptable.
You're a lawyer, you
yeah,
know.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think it's pretty telling as well that the only real police action on the night, as far as I'm aware, was to warn Jewish people away and, in fact, to take away a Jewish person who appeared with a flag.
Arresting him for his own safety, apparently.
Indeed.
It's terrible. Simone Abel, really appreciate you joining us in the studio, and thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and right now, here's Paul Murray.